I would like to welcome all of you. I would like to welcome also those who are watching us over internet. We are very happy that you are with us. But we would be more happy if you will be with us here. So I would like to welcome everyone and invite everyone who wants to join us and worship with us. We have plenty of room now. Even we still have some restrictions, we can fit more and more people in this church. Have you ever tried so hard and people did not take this well? You were trying, you were believing that you're doing well, but people had different idea. It's a true story. It happened in 2013 in Ohio in USA. It was reported by local newspaper that last evening there was a lady in her 50s. Her name was Susan Warren, who was arrested when she was shoveling snow out of the driveway. And you can think what's wrong to shoveling snow out of the driveway that this lady was arrested. But the problem was it wasn't her driveway, and she did not have permission of the owner to do so. So the owner, a little bit concerned, called police. Police arrived, and when they interviewed Susan Warren, they actually noticed that she is not doing this for the first time. They actually had some complaints about her action from the previous days. And one of them was when Susan Warren broke into the house in Cleveland, USA. She cleaned the house to the perfect state. She cleaned like no one cleaned this house before. And when she was about to leave, she left a note on the table with her phone number and says on the note, "You owe me $75 for cleaning your house." When the owner of the house returned home, she called Susan, and she was a little bit confused. So she asked, "Susan, are you sure you cleaned the correct house? I think you made mistake." However, Susan said, No. It wasn't a mistake. This is what I'm doing all the time. It turned out that homeowners and police had a little bit different idea than Susan herself. Susan was under impression that she is doing so well. But homeowners and police believe that she is committing crime. Have you ever done something that you believed you done so well, and the others had a different idea? But you know, the problem is going deeper. If you're doing things in the name of God, and your action is against God's values, it's against what God wants us to do. You taking emblems with you, you quoting the Bible verses, you doing things that you believing you're doing very well as a Christian, but instead of bringing people to God, it's turning them away from God. Such action happened in the time of so-called religious war or holy wars, when this kind of wars were caused by the desire to convert others from other religions to mine religion. You know that the word religion is actually never used in the Bible? I actually didn't know about this. When I did my research, I learned that the word religion is used from the 17th century. It's interesting, because from that time, people using this word to support their actions, to support what they believe in, and to support conversion of others to their religion. Very often leaders, in fanatic way, using the religious wars in the name of God to manipulate and to retain power over the whole countries. During religious wars, actions and views are motivated by the idea that we are removing evil from this earth. And you know, there were orders. One of them was called Teutonic Order. The knights of this order, they were wearing white cloaks like angels, and in front and the back they had a big black cross. And they were going everywhere where they were needed to convert people into Christianity. And they were using this by sword, fire, and killing even others. There were other orders. There were orders like Templar Order. Today, the same idea is behind the terrorist attacks, when some religions believe that by killing unbelievers, they're removing evil from this earth, and they're making path to the truth. Sometimes we're using emblems. Sometimes we're using Christian ideology to make our actions backed up with God's name in it. Also around 17th, 18th century, the German forces introduced the saying, God with us, wherever they were going to fight, whatever they were doing. And it was adopted even during the Second World War by Nazis, when the German forces tried to conquer the whole Europe, and on their belt they had this slogan, God with us, killing millions and millions of people. We can say it's them, not us. But you know, sometimes we also could be at the temptation, could be at the edge of doing something what we believe we're doing in very, very good meaning, but some other people will look at this from the different angle. We're sometimes using verses. And tell me if those verses could not encourage us in such actions. One of them is from Psalm 118. Psalm 118 and there verse 6 to 7. The Lord is for me, so I will have no fear. What can more people do to me? Yes, the Lord is for me. He will help me. I will look in triumph at those who hate me. Other verse, it's from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. that God speaks to his people, "This is my command. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." In Isaiah 41, we have another verse very often quoted, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." There is another verse in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 31, verse 6. In similar tone, we read, "Be strong and courageous. Do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is the Lord your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you." In the New Testament, there is also a verse like this, written to us by Paul, very often quoted by Christians who are going to fight for God. What shall we say about such wonderful things as this? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? You know, everyone who is believer would like to claim that God is on his or her side. But when we fail, when we are misunderstood by others, we can hardly believe that this happened to us, because God's supposed to be on our side. During the Civil War in USA, the President Abraham Lincoln was once asked if he is sure that the war he's having with South, if it's the good war. And someone asked him, "Mr. President, are you sure God is with you?" And you know, Abraham Lincoln responded something what became a very well-known response today. Abraham Lincoln responded that way, "Sir, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side. For God is always right." So I have a question for you today. Is God on your side? And I will say something what maybe you will not like. God is not on your side. And before you start judging me, let me to explain this. I will take you in the time of Joshua. Joshua is now standing at the entry to Promised Land. After 40 years of wandering around in the wilderness, he came, they crossed the Jordan River, they had celebration of Passover, and the manna stopped coming from heaven. And now, without manna that came and fed them for 40 years, now when finally they arrived to the Promised Land, they can conquer the Promised Land. They tried to do this 40 years before. But 40 years before, they tried to bring God on their side. And when God rejected their attempts, they says, "No, we are chosen people of God. We will do it." And in the book of Numbers, chapter 14, we can read that some of them says, "God is with us. God is on our side. We are his chosen children. We will go and fight in his name." And Numbers chapter 14 tells us that they were beaten and they lost and they were really humbled by enemies. So Joshua is now standing 40 years later at the same point, and he is about to enter the promised land, and he heard from God, from Moses, from God, from people who were encouraging him. He heard words like, "This is my command, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid or discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So Joshua is at the moment that he can make the same mistake that his people 40 years ago. But we find Joshua in the chapter 5, and there in verse 13 and 15, in very interesting situation. Before he went into the fight, he went on site to meditate and pray. And in verse 13, we actually read, "When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, 'Are you friend or foe?' 'Neither one,' he replied. 'I am the commander of the Lord's army.' At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. 'I am at your command,' Joshua said. 'What do you want your servant to do?' The commander of the Lord's army replied, 'Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy.' And Joshua did as he was told." You know, you have to remember who Joshua is. Joshua is one of the spies from 40 years ago. He knew what mistakes Israel made. He walked with Israel 40 years next to Moses, witnessed all miracles, witnessed all victories over enemies. And now he is no one else but the leader, the main captain of Israel's army. He is not an Israelite who is about to go with the army to fight Jericho. He is the leader, he is the commander of that army. And he is in isolated place, and suddenly he sees a man with a sword in hand. And you know, Joshua is not acting the way that he says, "Oh, I step back and prepare myself." He is not acting the way that he calls his servants to help him with the intruder, but he is acting like a true commander. He steps forward and demands response. "Who are you? Are you with us or are you against us? Are you on our side or are you on the side of enemies?" What we can learn from that story about our journey. In that story, the Bible is teaching us few points that could help us in our journey as Christians on this earth. For the first, we need to recognize the Lord in our lives. Joshua stands opposite a man in hand, and he demands to know who this man is. You know, on the first glance, we can think that Joshua did not recognize the man. He did not know who he is talking with. But when this man spoke to him, Joshua did not have any doubt. he fell on his face and worshipped him. He knew that the man who is facing him is Jesus Christ, the Lord himself. You know, it happened the same similar way with the apostles who were walking to Emmaus. They walked with a man for the whole day, but when the man prayed with them, when he spoke a prayer of blessing for the food, they recognized who is with them. Their eyes were opened, and they could not stop themselves from spreading the good news with others. We need to recognize Jesus in our life also. We need to know who he is in our life. Because if we take him as our helper, we are at command, he is helping us, we could be mistaken. But if we recognize that he is the Lord, the commander of the God's army, and we are his helpers, it's the first step to the successful journey. But the second step is when we recognize him, let us worship him. You know, this man in the story of Joshua, it's not introducing himself. It's not saying, I'm Jesus Christ. But this man is giving us a clue in how he behaves. He allows Joshua to worship him, to fall his face down and to worship him. He is also later on telling him the words that Moses himself heard from God when he was called into the ministry. At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in worship. If we recognize who Jesus is in our life, let us worship him. You know, there is a story that the Bible tells us about Apostle Thomas. And sometimes we actually talk about him probably with not a good tone. We tell him doubting Thomas, or we tell him about him unbelieving Thomas. But you know, Thomas, when he realized who is in front of him, when he was able to touch Jesus Christ, he said the most beautiful stand that we could say in our life. He said, my Lord and my God. If we recognize who Jesus is, worship him, and realize that he is your Lord and your God in your life. You know, the next step from the story of Joshua, after he realized who is in front of him, when he worshipped the man who stood in front of him, the next step was he was seeking will of the man in his life. In the verse that we just read, Joshua said very humble request. He said, I am. You know who Joshua was? He was a commander of Israelite army. He walked with Israelites without leaving any enemies behind, from victory to victory. And now, this leader of the nation is saying, I am at your command. Joshua said, what do you want your servant to do? Sometimes we are tempted in our life to create God in our image, to use emblems, to use Bible, to use Christian ideology and act the way we would like to act, instead of allowing God to reveal to us his will. Sometimes we have great idea, but even we try so hard, people don't recognize this in our life. I shared with you a few times already, when I finished Avondale, I was very excited. I hold in my hand double degree, theologian and ministry. Now I'm on fire to go and to change the church. So what you need? I think I did a good thing. I asked God for wisdom. This is what the most wise man in this world did. He asked God for wisdom, and we read that when he received God's wisdom, everything else was given to him. So knowing and learning from someone's experience, I decided I will ask God for wisdom. I prayed, God, I'm humbly coming in your presence to ask you for your wisdom. But what I did next was a mistake. Because even without conscience, when I finished my prayer, I behaved the way, like paraphrasing, I would say to God, thank you for your gift of wisdom, now stay here, I will go to act. And I remember when I went to my first church was full of problems. But I had God's wisdom, didn't I? I will fix them. And the first church board was coming. I'm their new pastor, coming with God's wisdom. I will change the church. Let me tell you how wrong I was. Because having God's wisdom, it's a great thing. But leaving God behind the doors, it's a big mistake. Searching for his will in our life, it's the next step. But the following step is to actually obey his will in our life. When Joshua asked the commander of the Lord's army, I'm at your command, what do you want me to do? He received a response that could puzzle us. Because the commander speaks to another soldier at the dawn of the day of the battle. He speaks to him, take off your sandals. You know, the soldier should be always at attention, especially when the army of enemy is close. But this is a huge lesson for Joshua. The Lord's army commander tells him, it's not your battle, it's my battle. Take your sandals off and know that the place where you are standing is holy. You know, there is a verse in Psalms which talks with the similar way, which it says to us, be still and know that I'm your God. We don't need God on our side. We need to be on his side. And when we are on God's side, we do not have to worry. We do not have to tremble. We do not have to be in full attention, because he promised us that he will be fighting for us. So when Joshua recognized to whom he spoke, he fell down with his face and worshiped the man. He seeked his will in his life, and he obeyed the commandments of the Lord. When he followed those steps, the next step that we know from the book of Joshua was that Joshua stepped in to be soldier for God. He did not brought God on his side, but he stepped in on God's side. Because in Joshua chapter 6, verse 27, that after this event, we read, the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the country. Remember the verse we read from the book of Romans? What shall we say about such wonderful things? If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Joshua experienced this verse in his life. If God is on your side, who could be against you? But you know, this verse has a one magic word that we often forget about. It's the word if. You know, when German army walked through Europe, killing millions of people, on their belts they had God with us. They forgot about the word if. But the word if tells us if we recognize him, if we worship him, if we seek his will in our life, if we obey his will in our life, we place ourselves on his side, and then who can ever be against us? Joshua stepped in the sight of God. And later on, when the whole nation was in front of him, he says, you have to choose whom you will serve. But me and my house will serve the Lord. I could be a commander of huge army, but if God is not with me, I'm in trouble. Saying the same what the Abraham Lincoln said to his responder. Sir, my concern is not whether God is on my side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right. And this is my prayer for all of us.